baby in terms of my passion of athletics and athletic performance. And I had actually a major back injury when I was working as a strength and conditioning coach. I was working with professional athletes with Gary Roberts Performance. I had, sort of made it in terms of my dream job. And I unfortunately was not practicing what I was preaching when it came to recovery. And I had a major back injury. And this actually sidelined me from doing what I do in a workplace and also what I knew, which was exercise, sport. And so for me, it was really difficult to kind of shift everything that I knew in terms of exercise and taking that for granted to everything that I could do from a recovery perspective. So I shifted my focus more towards what I did in between and what I could control, which was what I ate and how I recovered from my injury. And then I noticed that this was actually a very common thing with, the professional athletes I was working with, the amateur athletes, is, not knowing how to recover properly. And that just, focuses on the performance piece and the connection there where, okay, if we're doing all of these things in between our training sessions, it will optimize our performance in our competitions. So that is what I'm going to talk about today. As you can probably notice, I'm very passionate about this subject, and I love to, obviously give strategies to people like yourself who are, working with these athletes every single day in order to get the most out of this. Okay, so I always put this slide up because it is important to understand that there are a lot of variables when it comes to athlete performance. And we will be diving into all of these areas a little bit, but we're going to focus primarily on sleep, nutrition, and recovery in general. But just note that the individuality and genetics is a huge part of it, psychology and mindset. I know you had some experts talking about that as well. And then obviously the training piece, which is also a love of mine, but getting the most out of our training and all of these areas in terms of performance really comes down to looking at all of these factors. So we're going to talk about what is recovery, why is it important, what are circadian rhythms and why are they important to focus on for athletes, what is blue light and how does it affect athlete performance and recovery, and signs and symptoms of suboptimal recovery, how to optimize your athlete's circadian rhythm to boost recovery and performance. Okay, so what is recovery? So, we've heard in the last little bit, I think recovery is becoming more popular among professional athletes. LeBron James talked about last year how much he spends on his recovery, and not all of us can have, a private chef and massage therapists on site and all of these recovery specialists to help us. But there are a lot of things we can do, which we're going to talk about today. So professional athletes are talking more and more about what recovery means, how important it is to them. And we're going to get into a lot of these, day-to-day basic strategies on what you can do to help boost your athlete's recovery. So the definition of athlete recovery is recovery allows athletes to train and compete at their highest levels and compete to the best of their ability. So again, if they're not recovering in between, it's very difficult to get to that high performance level. And one thing to notice is that we're constantly recovering. So we're recovering during our training sessions in between sets, we're recovering in between practices with our drills. And then there's also the other 22 hours. So if athletes are training for 2 hours a day, there's 22 hours to optimize throughout their day in order to really make sure that they're getting the best out of their next session. So high levels of stress are going to drive adaptations, but the key is recovery. So there's a term in sports science called functional overreaching. And essentially it's that, perfect amount of pushing yourself in order to get these adaptations that we need to build up in our sport. And so functional overreaching, appropriate dose of overload versus non-functional overreaching, whereas essentially we're teetering on that overtraining, overuse, and causing a lot of stress on our systems, which would lead to under recovery and obviously poor performance. For athletes, recovery, is the differentiating factor between high performance and underperformance. And it is an opportunity to get 1% better. And so if you look at professional athletes and even athletes at any stage, like they go through these repetitions over and over again, and this stuff will be their edge because it's a lot of things that they can control in between their training sessions, practices, and competitions. Okay, so what is recovery? These are a couple quotes that I looked into in terms of a study that's talking about, sort of, again, a review paper on performance and recovery for athletes. And so an adequate balance between stress. So again, that functional overreaching, we need to stress the system in order to get these results. So training, competition load, and other factors. And recovery is essential for athletes to achieve continuous high level performance. So again, if they're able to get to these high levels of performance, they need to focus on this stuff. Due to inter and intra-individual variability of responses to training, competition, and recovery strategies, a diverse set of expertise is required to address the multifaceted phenomena of recovery, performance, and the interactions to transfer knowledge from sports science to sports practice. So that's always what we're trying to do, especially when you're working in the field behind the scenes, focusing on transferring what we're learning to actual sports practice is so important. And notice that it's an individual approach. So I just wanted to point that out, that it's highly individual. Okay, so the three aspects of recovery that we are going to focus on today, some of them we'll talk about a little bit more: the sleep, the lifestyle, and the nutrition piece. But there are a lot of factors. We went over some of the other variables. And so again, just making sure that we're focusing on this holistic approach. So looking at the whole athlete, there's a lot of different factors when it comes to recovery, but we're really going to hone in on these ones today. Okay, so we can't talk about, athlete recovery without getting into a little bit of the science and the nerdy stuff, which is what I love to talk about. So I'm sorry if I bore you, but I get really jazzed on this stuff, so I just assume other people will. So I want to talk about circadian rhythm. So what it is it's a natural biological sleep-wake cycle. So essentially, as humans, we have this natural rhythm where our bodies are telling us when to wake up in the morning, when to eat essentially, and when to go to bed. And this is highly related on the light sensors in our body. So if you look at the diagram that I have here, we're going to talk about some hormones and get into a little bit of that. But what I wanted to point out with this diagram is that it's highly related on our light sensors. And that's really what we're going to get into today, because if you think back to, before the light bulb, I know it's very difficult to even think about that. Before the light bulb, before these computers, before, any of our screens were in front of us, and even just, again, artificial light, our ancestors were forced to, work off of this circadian rhythm. So, again, they couldn't do a lot of things in the nighttime because it was dark. So they had to wind down and go to sleep. And then they could get up in the morning, and that was their light sensor to get up and start to move. So it can be affected by lifestyle factors. So we're going to talk about light and meal timing, and really make sure that we kind of get into, again, this master clock that we have in our systems, and all of our organs run off of this as well. So again, our endocrine system, our neuromuscular system, all of these systems are running off of this. So there's different hormones secreted, there's different systems that are resetting overnight, and different things happening during the day than during the night. And we're going to talk about some of those things. Okay, so our endocrine system, which is essentially the production of our hormones, play a very important role in our circadian rhythm. So although there are many hormones out there, I'm going to focus on a couple because these are the big ones that people have probably heard about and are really important to understand when we're talking about circadian rhythm and optimizing recovery. So the first one is cortisol. And when we think of cortisol, you might think, negatively, and we think of like that stress hormone, and it's bad to have a lot of it. And so with every hormone, they have a role, and it's all about balancing the hormones so that they're not overactive and that they're not produced all the time. So they work on negative feedback loops, meaning that if we have too much cortisol in our system, that can, for too long, that can be a bad thing. But for something like exercise, we have a natural cortisol spike, and it's actually very important for us in terms of creating energy. So if you look at the cortisol loop, this is technically how the cortisol pattern goes throughout the day. And again, it's going to depend on a lot of different things. If you have coffee, if you work out, if you're looking at screens, which we're going to talk about. So essentially, our cortisol levels will naturally rise in the morning, and then they're going to drop down throughout the day as we prepare for sleep and as it gets darker out. So our cortisol will naturally rise first thing in the morning with sun. And so it's known as also our waking energy hormone. So it's actually a good thing. We need cortisol in terms of producing energy. And so again, it works on that negative feedback loop. So if you have a stressor coming in, for example, right before this presentation for me. So if you have a stressor come in and your body is technically pumping out this cortisol, it will work on a negative feedback loop in terms of like, okay, I have too much of it, it's time to turn off. The stress response will work in that way if it's working in a healthy way. And so in acute situations, it's actually very important for us to have this. If we, again, have to run away from a bear, we want to have this acute response where we have an increase in cortisol and it helps us to react. So again, it's very important in terms of that loop. But if we turn it on chronically for an extended period of time, so again, this could be even overtraining for an athlete. If it's constantly that physical stress on their body, they could have a lot of cortisol build up and they could actually decrease the response to it and have issues with energy and kind of burnout and overtraining and those types of things. So again, it's all about this balance, but cortisol is a very important hormone to understand that it rises in the morning with the sun, and we want to make sure that it's a healthy amount of it, especially when it comes to exercise. Okay, so the role of melatonin. So melatonin, again, probably you have heard of because it's known as a sleep hormone, naturally increases in the evening and decreases in the morning. It's highly affected by light exposure, which we're going to talk about a lot today. And the production does change with puberty, which I find very interesting. I've read several papers of this, but the reason that your adolescents are, and the young athletes that you're working with are staying up later, going to bed way later than you do. I know for me, I go to bed at 9:30, so they're definitely going to bed way later than I am. And there's a reason behind this because their actual melatonin production changes during puberty. So it's actually a later release. And so they want to go to bed later and they actually want to sleep into the morning as well. So adolescents, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but adolescents, there's a reason behind that schedule of wanting to go to bed later because it's a natural biological rhythm and this release of melatonin is actually later. Okay, so disruption in our circadian rhythm. What does this mean? So, the most obvious one is sleep. So poor sleep, you're going to obviously have issues if, your body, for example, shift workers or even athletes, we're going to talk about this because they're very susceptible to changes in their light dark schedules because of when they perform and also their schedules in terms of traveling, jet lag, staying in hotels, a bunch of different factors that we're going to talk about today in as it pertains to athletes and all of this. So poor sleep is the biggest one. Metabolic dysfunction. So athletes' ability to use glycogen, so glucose that they take in from their food, their fat oxidation, so fat burning, being able to use fat for fuel. And this can actually increase cravings and hunger hormone disruptions. We're going to talk a little bit about that as well, but these can become major issues for athletes. Cognitive impairment is a huge one. There's a ton of studies coming out about poor sleep and cognitive function. I know myself, when I don't have a good sleep, I am a completely different person than when I have a good sleep. So it does make sense, but there's also some specific things to athletes like, reaction time and these skills, tactical skills that, athletes need in order to perform that are affected by poor sleep. Cardiovascular impairment, obviously a huge issue with athletes. GI function, so athletes are already susceptible to a lot of GI issues based on the amount of physical stress that they have. So, this could become a further issue if they're not sleeping, they're not able to fully digest. The term rest, digest, recover comes from our relaxation, parasympathetic nervous system. So again, being able to rest and digest is incredibly important for athletes. Immune system dysfunction. Obviously, we're talking a lot about immune system these days. So it's incredibly important to understand that athletes are also a little bit more susceptible to issues with their immune system because they're turning on that physical stress all the time. Okay, so what is blue light? So I just want to start by saying I'm not a blue light expert. I'm a recovery person. So this is something that I'm very passionate about. And I think that there's going to be a crazy amount of research coming out in the next 10 years in terms of artificial light and what's going on with our systems, how it's affecting us, because we didn't always have this. I know when I was a young athlete, which is going to date me, I didn't have a cell phone. So I wasn't able to look at my cell phone late at night. I could watch TV and I could do these things, but again, the accessibility of these devices is so much more prevalent these days. So what is blue light? Essentially, it's artificial light, including light coming from smartphones, tablets, laptop computers, game consoles, LED televisions, artificial home lighting, street lighting, and car lighting. So this is a big one too, like having street lights come in, you're still getting a certain amount of artificial light that can disrupt your sleep pattern in the circadian rhythm that we're talking about. Okay, so how does blue light impair recovery? So when we look at, just again, like this artificial light and thinking about that circadian rhythm that we just talked about, it tricks the body into thinking that it's daytime. So if we're looking at screens all the time, we have this master clock, which is called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Oh, wow, I got that out. So what it is it's basically our master clock and telling us that it's light or dark, or we should sleep, or we should wake up. And so it's regulating a lot of different systems in our body. But if we're tricked into thinking that it's daytime because of the amount of light that's coming in, we can actually decrease our melatonin production up to 23%, which is a lot when you think about the amount that you need to, again, produce in order to get a good night's sleep. Melatonin isn't necessarily going to help you get to sleep. It helps with the quality of the sleep and staying asleep. And that's really an important thing. So that brings me to my next point: decreases quality of sleep, which leads to increased stress on the body. So we go through different phases of sleep. And this is why it's important to ask specific questions with athletes, which we're going to cover, that are really not, okay, did you sleep at 8 hours? The athlete might be like, yeah, I slept 8 hours, but maybe it took them an hour and a half to fall asleep. And then they, were waking up throughout the whole night. They woke up and they, had to go to the bathroom or whatever. And so the quality of sleep in these different phases, if they're not getting into deep sleep, which is our regenerative stage, this is going to be a major issue for all of the, again, regenerative phases that we need to go through. So this is our muscular system, our hormonal system, and, our immune system, all of these systems that need to reset overnight. This is going to be a big problem if they're not able to get into that quality of sleep. Okay, so adolescence and blue light. So again, there's not a ton of studies yet on athletes specifically with this, but it can all be related because athletes are these, again, physical specimens that are using up a lot more nutrients. They're affected by this stuff in terms of their recovery because of the amount of physical stress that they go through. And then if you have an athlete who has additional stressors, like every athlete, like student athlete, for example, with their school, maybe they have, family stuff going on, girlfriends, boyfriends, whatever it is, there's stress in life. And so athletes can be more affected by this because of the amount of physical stress that they're putting on their bodies too. So that's why recovery is such an important thing. So in addition, exposures of adolescent to the numerous electronic devices prior to bedtime has become a great concern because LEDs emit much more blue light than the white incandescent bulbs, and compact fluorescent bulbs have therefore a greater impact on the biological clock. A large number of adolescents move to evening chronotypes. So again, a chronotype is just like when you prefer to be up. And so there are natural, rhythms of people who are night owls and then early risers. But again, it still comes back to, not tricking our bodies too much into these artificial schedules. And so experience in a misalignment between biological and social rhythms, which added to sleep loss results in fatigue, daytime sleepiness, behavioral problems, and poor academic achievement. So these are things that we're looking into a lot more as it pertains to athletes, because if they're fatigued, they're not performing properly. If they have daytime sleepiness, they're going to make poor decisions when it comes to, specific things on the field or on the ice or on the court. Behavioral problems. So again, mood disorders. If you have a grumpy athlete, this is going to cause a lot of problems in terms of their performance, right? And so poor academic achievement is also one. So again, not being able to make those quick decisions. Okay, so signs and symptoms of fatigue and decreased recovery. So again, we talked about decreased performance. That's probably one of the big ones. Monitoring changes in our autonomic nervous system. So we talked about the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. So again, that high amount of stress and not being able to turn it off becomes a big problem for athletes. HRV changes. So HRV is heart rate variability, and it's a recovery marker. So these are some things that you can check into: mood changes. We talked about overall fatigue, weight loss or gain, and chronic infections. Okay, so recovery factor number one, we're really going to get into sleep, and so what we can do about all of this. Okay, so we need sleep for survival. It's actually used in some measures as torture, because if we don't have sleep, when we have insomnia, we become different people, and it really affects us, and it's a survival mechanism. We need it. So the athlete connection, I mean, the big thing here is that it's so many physical demands on the body that they need this rejuvenation time. So there is no recovery without sleep. You know, irregular performance schedules, jet lag, increased physical stress, these are all things that athletes specifically are going to have issues with. And adolescents, as I mentioned, actually require more sleep, so 9+ hours, and many of them are not getting that in terms of rejuvenation. So, you know, this becomes a big problem. And so there's athletes who have come out and said how much they sleep, like Roger Federer and LeBron James say they sleep 12 hours a day. And if you think about the amount of training and stress that they have on their systems, performance stress, traveling, all of this, it's so important for their bodies to regenerate. So these athletes are coming out and saying, like, sleep is such an important part of this. And, you know, we have to take it seriously. Okay, so biggest limiting factor for athlete performance, I can't stress it enough. I'm a sports nutritionist. I'm also a trainer. I think those things are incredibly important, but if they're not sleeping, it is so hard to get these results with athletes. And it's so hard to get continued performance without overtraining and without developing things like REDs and issues with these athletes in performance. They come down to how they recover. So sleep is anabolic, meaning that it builds you up. So if we think about being awake, where, you know, obviously it's important because we're doing our jobs, we're exercising, we're practicing, we're doing all these things. But if you do that all the time, so if you were to do a training session all the time, you become very catabolic. You have to break down your muscle tissue, right? And so that's part of training, but then you have to build it back up. So for example, growth hormone is actually released primarily overnight. And so this is one big thing where you can, like, if you're, you know, looking to build muscle mass, or your athletes are looking to get stronger, it's very difficult for them to do that. So in terms of building up immune system, skeletal muscular system, balances hormones, improves your metabolism. We're going to talk about that, balances blood sugar, boosts cognitive function, and affects our performance physically. So like speed, strength, technical, psychology. So all of this is a factor in terms of getting enough sleep. Your sleep will affect your athletic performance in every single way. And so your body repairs its muscle tissue and produces essential hormones that regulate your hunger scale, as well as prevent harmful diseases. So when we look at all of this, it comes down to, yes, we want our athletes to perform, but we also want them to be healthy long-term. And sometimes those do not always match up in terms of what we're asking our athletes to do from a physical stress perspective. So if you constantly deprive yourself of sleep, your body won't be able to take care of itself, and you are likely going to experience injury as an athlete. So in a study actually published by the National Strength and Conditioning Association, athletes require a greater quantity of sleep and recover sufficiently from injury, intense training sessions, and competition. So training is just such a small part of getting bigger, faster, stronger, and some of the most important responses and adaptations happen when you sleep. And so I can't stress this enough. I will always look into it further when, you know, I'm working with any athletes. If this is a big red flag, this is where we start. Okay, some stats on sleep. Again, I really like bringing it all back to what we're talking about in the science world when it comes to sleep and performance. So almost 40% of Americans, I couldn't find a lot of data on Canadians, about 80 million people get 6 hours of sleep or less. The average American adult reports about 2 nights of insufficient sleep per week. And then this was actually done on American college athletes. So American College Health Association survey found that on average, most student athletes report 4 nights of insufficient sleep. So 4 out of their 7 nights. Insomnia was not as much of an issue, but again, this is really going to affect them. If there's 4 nights out of their 7 nights, this is going to really affect, again, all those systems and processes that we just talked about. Okay, so again, talking more about what's going on in the sports scientist world, but sports scientists believe that the lack of sleep impacts your physiology via increasing your heart rate and oxygen consumption, as well as ramping up oxygen levels, meaning your body has to work so much harder in order to perform at its highest level. So this is a huge issue for athletes because it means that, again, they're going to increase their time to fatigue. They're going to have a lot harder of a time getting to these high performance levels that we need them to be if their lack of sleep. So muscle glycogen can also decrease with the fuel availability during training. So again, the amount of glucose available to them to use when they get into those high intensity sprints. Numerous studies have shown that insufficient sleep, so less than 7 hours, blunts neurocognitive function, attention, learning, and executive function. Huge issue for athletes. So this is creating, again, like a big problem when it comes to looking at the overall, overall mental state of your athletes. If they're not sleeping, they're going to be, struggling when it comes to making these decisions on the court, on the field, on the ice, wherever it is that they're competing. So less than 8 hours of sleep per night can actually make you 1.7 times more susceptible to injury, which again, very scary for athletes if they're not, again, cognitively there, if their muscle tissue isn't acting the same, if they're not able to use glucose in the same way, it becomes a huge issue for, risk of injury. And just 1 night of insufficient sleep, can make you as insulin resistant as a type 2 diabetic. Now, this is very crazy stat, and I looked into it a lot further. So this is due to the fact that the lack of sleep impairs your carbohydrate metabolism and has a negative influence on specific macronutrient nutritional plans aimed at improving performance. So if sleep is altering your carbohydrate metabolism, then sports nutritionists like myself may be working in vain with some of these athletes, and sleep could be addressed at first to optimize these nutritional interventions, which will, optimize performance. So again, even people like myself who live and breathe sports nutrition, if they're not sleeping, it's really going to affect what I'm doing because, again, their bodies are just in these states of stress where they're not able to actually use their substrates and get to these higher intensity, levels that we need them to get to. Okay, so what can we do about it? So I wanted to always give actionables. We're actually going to do a case study as well. I'm going to show you specifically what one of my NHL players did to kind of reset a circadian rhythm and focus on, again, optimizing everything that we can control, right? There's a lot of things that we can't control, their schedule, obviously what's going on in the world right now and the amount of stress, that health is playing on the whole world right now, but we can do a lot of these small things, which is just coming up with these simple basic habits in order to optimize their recovery. So one thing we can do, and again, this is not always possible, but we can focus on same bedtime. So focusing on going to bed, especially when they don't have competition at the same time, whether that's, preferably before 12 o'clock, because after 12 o'clock, your circadian rhythm and your sleep cycles will be disrupted. So, it's always better to get quality sleep starting before 12 o'clock. Hard to tell teenagers that, I know, but if you can even get at 11, you're making small steps towards performance. So avoiding coffee or stimulants at least 7 hours. This is a major issue with a lot of athletes. They chug, coffee all day. This is, obviously I love coffee too. I have one every morning, but the issue is the overconsumption of it because you're ramping up your cortisol artificially. And so what happens is they become reliant on it. And then also, everybody metabolizes coffee different. There's actually specific coffee genes where, you might metabolize coffee slow or fast, and it's going to affect your sleep if you're one of those slow metabolizers like myself. I can't have it past like 2 p.m. in the afternoon. So avoiding excessive alcohol. This is again for the older athletes, but sometimes they think a couple glasses of wine will help them to sleep. The issue is it might help them get to sleep, but that quality of sleep and staying to sleep is what's affected in terms of, waking up constantly throughout the night. It increases your body temperature, which is poor for sleep as well. So again, making sure that we're really focusing on what we can do to, get these good habits ingrained, especially when it comes to athletes. So have your last meal at least a couple hours before bed. So this is a big one. Again, it's not always possible for athletes to do this if they're, again, trying to build muscle or they have late competition. But if they can have their last meal, especially training, like getting your body used to giving it a little bit of a rest, and not having something that's really carbohydrate or fatty before bed, that's really going to affect their sleep cycles. Getting ample sunlight during the day. So I talked about this a lot, making sure that you're naturally getting in the sun, not just all of your light coming from these artificial screens, because that's really going to affect. I know for myself, I actually get headaches if I stare at my screen and I don't go outside all day, because it has happened. It's probably happened to everybody, especially during COVID, where we're staring at our screens all day, and it's like, wait a second, I haven't been outside all day. So this is a huge part of just, again, resetting this circadian rhythm and making sure that the blue light isn't affecting you as much. So powering down, so limiting blue light exposure. I can't stress this one enough. I think there's a big problem with staring at screens and just kind of, again, making sure that we're relying on these artificial computers and phones and all of these, again, they give us a lot of entertainment, but the issue is that they're tricking our bodies again into thinking that it's daytime, and it's blunting our melatonin, it's decreasing our quality of sleep. So I can't stress that enough. So if you can put your phone on airplane mode, outside of the room, I always recommend use an old school alarm clock if you can. And then amber light bulbs and blue light blocking glasses. This is like the tech stuff that's kind of cool. They're coming out with a lot of different types of glasses. I think the best ones are the ones that have a little amber blocking them by sounds of it by scientists. This is kind of like, again, making sure that you're emitting as much of that light as possible if you have to be on your screens. And so blue light blocking glasses, you can even get light bulbs. You can put a screen app on your computer and your phone where it's in night mode, where it's actually decreasing the amount of blue light that you're getting. So these are all strategies that you can look into, and I'm happy to obviously link any of this as well. Okay, so adding on to the evening routine, room in a cooler temperature. If you've ever gone camping and slept in a tent, you know that this is very true. You have to be in a cool temperature in order to get quality sleep. Otherwise, if your body is hot, you are going to have a disrupted sleep. So our bodies actually want to be in a cooler temperature. It helps to, regulate, again, all this hormonal processes overnight. And so evening wind down routine, this could be a bit different for everybody, but having something that's going to relax you, watching Narcos or something really stressful before bed, as fun as that is, will cause a stress response, and it can affect your sleep because, again, you're kind of hyped up before bed. And so this is actually a big issue with athletes because they perform a lot of time at night. So we're going to talk about specifically what I do with my athletes who do have to perform at night in terms of mitigating some of this. And the biggest thing is you can control what you can control. So, if you can't control everything about their schedule, you can control some of these wind down routines. And then the next day when they do have a time off, they can really focus on resetting their circadian rhythm and making sure that they're able to recover. Nutrition, so limit stimulants. I talked about coffee, too low carb. If your athletes are not eating enough carbohydrates, they can actually blunt the amount of melatonin production as well. Room stress-free zone. So I can't stress that enough. It's so important to, make sure that you're not on your computer, not watching really stressful things in your bedroom, because you want that to be like your sleep zone and recovery zone. Supplementation is the last resort, and I'll talk about why, but it is the last resort in terms of like what to do next. I always start with all of these lifestyle things to make sure that we're looking into it. And check hormones. So this could be like an older athlete, you want to look further into it. I do a bunch of functional testing with my athletes to kind of see exactly what's going on with their cortisol, exactly what's going on with their melatonin and their stress hormones. And this can be, again, an added thing, but it's not appropriate for everyone. Obviously a 12-year-old or anything like that, you don't necessarily need to check their hormones, but it is something that, like, okay, we've done all these things. There might be something else going on, and we can get more individualized information with that. Okay, so What about waking up? So the morning routine is everything in the wellness world these days. So getting ample sunlight first thing. So again, thinking back to that cortisol response. If you're getting ample sunlight first thing in the morning, it means you're naturally building up your cortisol. So technically, you're not supposed to have your coffee first thing in the morning because it will actually artificially increase your cortisol. I know everyone's really mad at me for that one. Everyone's going to, so it's going to increase your cortisol first thing in the morning artificially, when naturally, if you go out on your balcony or, go for a walk first thing and you get sunlight, that's actually your best way to increase your energy and increase your cortisol first thing. I'm not saying not to have coffee, but wait an hour, let your body naturally wake up, and definitely get out in the sun if you can. If you live in a really gray city, do your best. There is actually some lights out there that I get my, some of my NHL players to carry around with them if they're in dark cities and they're in a rink, that they actually will, have this art. It's not actually artificial light, it's emulating the sunlight. It is an artificial light that's emulating the sunlight, but it's, again, having the same effect of getting sunlight first thing, where the sun might not be up, or they're, traveling and they have jet lag and it's a different time zone. So these are some ways that you can actually boost that cortisol first thing in the morning, which will make a huge difference in the circadian rhythm. Drink water before coffee. That's a huge one, just for, again, checking in to make sure that your body is naturally detoxifying overnight. You're dehydrated, so making sure that you're getting in, electrolytes and first thing in the morning. Check in with yourself before external stimuli. So this is really important. We tend to reach for our phones right away. I think it's really important to maybe focus more on the balance between, making sure that we're checking in with what we're doing. This could mean a mobility, taking a cold shower to kind of stress the system first thing in the morning, and then prioritizing proper fuel for the day. So protein, healthy fats, fiber will kind of satiate the athlete, and instead of, having something that's maybe really sugar-based first thing in the morning, it'll just make them hungry in an hour. Okay, so lifestyle. So this is going to, again, focus on the whole circadian rhythm, getting sunlight throughout the day, making sure that we're decreasing that blue light exposure as much as possible, taking walk breaks, making sure that we're focusing on the holistic approach, not just our, what we're doing in the evening and first thing in the morning. We want it to be a whole daily thing. Okay, so awareness, sunlight throughout the day. I think I've stressed that enough. Exercise. So again, monitoring how much exercise, making sure we're not getting into that overtraining. So you can track HRV, resistance training is really important, basic aerobic fitness, making sure the athlete's focusing on things like deload week, and then really looking at their schedule in terms of a periodization program. So this will all help in terms of making sure that they're, getting into a natural rhythm as much as possible. And then recovery tools. So there are a ton of recovery tools out there. Some of them are really helpful, but again, it's very individualized, and a lot of it just comes into checking with what you need. So maybe it's massage therapy, maybe it's acupuncture. All of these things will help recovery, but you can just start with the basics. Okay, so deep breathing, this is a big one. So improving our parasympathetic tone. So again, decreasing our stress response in the evening can be big. Meditation, so this could be even when we walks in nature. It doesn't necessarily mean an hour with candlelight and incense and all that stuff. It can just be sitting for 5 minutes, breathing. That could be a version. I use walks in nature as, a version of meditation. Non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So this is a fancy way of saying you need to get out there and walk and not just, use your exercise as your activity. Our bodies are meant to move. So our total energy expenditure is actually, more than just our workout. It's what we're doing throughout the whole day. So this is just building up heat throughout the day, and your, general activity throughout the day makes up way more of this total energy expenditure than your really intense workout. So just think about that. Walking is so important. Taking the stairs, being active, getting up out of your seat, those types of things. So with athletes, sitting down and watching video games or playing video games all day is not necessarily going to help them recover. They need to get out and be active. And if you can get them playing another sport, being outside, even better. Stress resilience techniques. So I use the term stress resilience because we have to bounce back and be stronger from our stressful events. And that's what exercise is. And that's why I use the term stress resilience in terms of stress management. So stress resilience means that we're coming back stronger from it, as opposed to, just managing the stress load that we have. We actually want to create these physical adaptations, whether it's mentally, and then, psychologically, and also, obviously internal stressors. So getting stronger after we stress our systems. Okay, so I can't go through this whole presentation without talking about how to boost our circadian rhythm through nutrition. So there's a lot of factors when it comes to nutrition, but we're going to get into some of the specifics as it pertains to our circadian rhythm. So again, boosting that natural biological cycle where we can really optimize our recovery. Okay, so mastering the basics. This is my nutrition hierarchy. Real whole food first, health-based nutrition. So if your athlete needs to work on things like maybe their gut health or their immune system, this is where we're just focusing on the health of the athlete. Then we can focus on performance nutrition and supplementation. So that's, again, that high level of, we have to cover the basics first. Get athletes on a regular eating schedule. This is huge for, again, this circadian rhythm and making sure that they're not all over the place. Appropriate macronutrient timing. So this is going to be based on their goal and their phase of training. So whether they're in season, off season, this is going to change. Their total caloric intake to match their total energy expenditure. The amount of athletes that I see under eating is crazy. You would think that I would have the opposite problem, but a lot of the time, the amount of energy expenditure that they have, they're not eating enough. So again, making sure that we're taking into account this. I do some calculations and work with the athlete on boosting this to make sure that they're not, putting themselves in a situation where they are, overtrained and undernourished. So try to have their last meal at least 2 hours. Again, if unavoidable, we want to make sure that they're having protein-rich snacks closer to sleep time. So balancing blood sugar, these are huge for circadian rhythm. So again, making sure that these negative effects of looking at our screens and, again, all of the issues with recovery come down to these basic principles where we can, obviously boost it in between. So balancing blood sugar, prioritizing protein, fiber, starchy carbohydrates, and healthy fats, eating foods to boost melatonin. So one of my favorite ones is tart cherry juice. I actually get my athletes to make tart cherry ice cream. And so it's one of the favorites in terms of boosting melatonin production, wild salmon, bananas, avocado, nuts, and seeds, and pay attention to hunger and satiation cues. So our hormones, ghrelin and leptin, will be affected by lack of sleep. So ghrelin is actually our hunger hormone. So if ghrelin is elevated, we're going to be hungry all day. And if for anyone who has, experienced lack of sleep, which is everyone on this call, you'll be hungrier the next day. And so also leptin is our satiation. So leptin actually decreases and ghrelin increases. So we're hungrier and we, again, aren't satiated. So we'll eat something and we won't be as satiated as we normally would if our sleep cycle is on point. And again, nutrition is an individualized approach. This is always something that I have to stress because it's really important to know that you have to meet the individual where they're at and, really focus on the athlete in front of you. Okay, so case study, I always want to bring it all together. This was perfect timing. One of my NHL athletes who I work with actually reached out to me and he said, I'm having a really hard time, winding down after a game. I'm struggling, it's hours afterwards where I'm finally able to sleep. I don't feel rested in the morning. I'm, really having an issue with this schedule because they're literally playing every second day right now. They can't avoid that. That's their schedule. So we tried to look at what we could change. And I got into, again, just looking at the whole lifestyle, what's going on with his circadian rhythm, what he was doing. And so he was eating a really heavy meal. So it had steak, double baked potato, broccoli, and salad. He had lots of screen time. So he was checking his phone right after the game, all of his messages from his friends and family and all of that. And so we looked into how, some of this is unavoidable. How can we optimize your schedule to make you wind down after the game? And so we started with his sleep optimization. So we started with he was in a rink all day. And for anyone I work in a rink, so I know what this is like, but if anyone's working in a rink, you're literally staring at concrete walls. You're typically not getting any sunlight. Again, your vitamin D production is usually low in hockey players. I find it very common that, again, they're just not getting outside. So we got him to just go for a 10-minute walk each day. And we tried to do it first thing in the morning so that, again, he's getting this natural cortisol response. He's getting sunlight. He can kind of check in with himself. So first thing in the morning, game day, he was going outside and having a walk. Then we got him to avoid looking at screens post-game. So again, very difficult for athletes to tell them to totally avoid it, but I got him some blue light blocking glasses. He put a screen on night mode. And then he also just tried to really focus on decreasing and just doing the essential things on his phone, like messaging his family, his mom, things like that. So we also decreased his consumption. He was really focusing a lot on relying on consumption of caffeine to get through his day because he wasn't rested. So this became a huge issue. So we decreased the caffeine, used it strategically to help him with his performance in the game because there's a ton of research on that side and he really liked it. So that was one option. And then we decreased the temperature in his room. So he's like, I'm always hot, I feel like, and so we actually got him to decrease the temperature of his room, and that made a huge difference. And then we looked at his lifestyle. So again, like what's he doing throughout the day? So when he got home, he took a cold shower to decrease his body temperature. He did box breathing. So I got him to lie with his feet up the wall to help to reset his nervous system. And he did, 4 seconds inhale, 4 seconds at the top, 4 seconds exhale, and 4 seconds at the bottom. So this is just a way of controlling breath that's going to bring him down a little bit, because again, exercising, performing at night is that sympathetic nervous system overdrive. It's a stress response, physical stress response. So again, we got him to, again, calm his nervous system. He did like 8 to 10 breaths. It took him, 5 to 10 minutes at the most. He said he could do that. Again, it's little things that they can control. And then we actually got him to listen to Headspace and Calm. So he actually really liked the apps that go along with meditation. So there's some sleep and performance apps that are available to everybody. If you have your phone and you're using it, that we can kind of tune into, that are going to calm our nervous system. Okay, and then nutrition wise, we got him to have something right after the game. So like literally replenishing his electrolytes as well as a protein shake. And then that allowed him to have a smaller dinner and focus on the next day being his kind of refeed larger meal, because a larger meal was really affecting his sleep. And it was like heavy digestible protein. So with the steak, he was having baked potato. And again, they're really hungry after the game, but sometimes that can affect their sleep if they're having this huge meal and then trying to go right to bed. So we actually got him to change it to wild salmon instead, which can increase his melatonin. We got him to have some tart cherry juice. And then he also was on a magnesium supplement anyway to help with like cramping and also down regulating his nervous system as well. Okay, so this is just a quick, like, how do we track all this stuff? How do we know? So I just use a simple green, yellow, and red tracking system. So we're looking at, okay, was your sleep in the from 7 to 10 out of 10? Yellow was 5 to 7, not so great. And then red would be 0 to 4. So again, you can't control all the time, shutting it down if it's a red day, but you can always check in with your athletes. How was your sleep? And so we're asking different questions as it pertains to sleep. What time did you go to bed? What time did you wake up? Are you looking at screens before bed? Ask them that. Do you feel rested when you wake up? Did you wake up a lot throughout the night? So instead of just saying, hey, like, did you get 8 hours of sleep? Athletes will not specifically know the answer to a lot of these questions, but if you ask and dig a little bit deeper, you'll see, oh, they woke up several times throughout the day or throughout the night and they didn't feel rested. And then you can say in the morning, like, do you feel energetic for your workout and for your practice today? How is your appetite? Do you have muscle soreness? So these are things that you can check into where it's like, okay, what is their body score? What is their sleep score? And what is their nutrition score? Common tracking methods. So these are some athlete questionnaires and you can find these online, and you can easily work this in with your athletes. So again, like checking in their mood states, perceived exertion, recovery stress questionnaire for athletes, fatigue. I make my own, but these are some standardized ones that you can look into that, you're like, I don't know where to start. I don't know what questions to ask. I feel like just having a conversation with the athlete is always the best measure, because you can have that communication and there's that trust instead of, getting them to just fill out a questionnaire. Having that conversation, asking those questions of, quality of sleep and were they looking at their screen? What did they do for recovery? So again, just checking in with the athletes. Okay, references. I can share all of this. There's 3 slides of references, lots of studies. Perfect. And thank you so much. We got through it.
That was awesome, Sylvie. I think I'm ready to change my morning and night routine already. I definitely have some changes to make, but we do have lots of time here for questions,
Perfect.
which we're very, very excited to get to, and they have been coming in like wildfire here. So we're going to start with the first couple here. So how come people are sluggish in the mornings? Is cortisol lower in the morning for some people?
Yeah, great question. When there's cortisol dysregulation, so when you have like that negative feedback loop that's unfortunately not working properly, so this could be due to too much cortisol over extended period of time, and then looking at screens at night will actually increase cortisol, and it can exhaust your cortisol in the morning. So you can actually have dysregulation of too much cortisol at night, and then it drops down too much in the morning, and you feel really sluggish. So this just comes down to, again, like looking at how you can optimize that circadian rhythm, boosting cortisol naturally in the morning. The sunlight thing makes a huge difference. And again, like try not to rely too much on things like coffee first thing, and getting it back to that as much as possible. And then decreasing your cortisol at nighttime is a huge one. If it's an athlete, obviously that's harder to control, but just making sure that you're doing your best. But yes, that's a very common thing when I do hormone testing. I'll see a lot of tanked cortisol first thing in the morning because their cortisol is so high in the evening.
Great. Now, what is your thoughts on regular melatonin supplements, and what should coaches note about ages of athletes possibly taking supplements?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. And so I did put in the slide when I was talking about supplementation, like melatonin, always with caution. It works for some people and it doesn't work for some people. It is literally a last resort for me when I look into, athletes and basically trying to not get them to take the sleeping pill. I would rather them do a natural thing. So melatonin can work for some people, but I would prefer that they work on all of the lifestyle and nutrition things we talked about today before they go to a melatonin supplementation, because again, people can get hooked on it, and they can become reliant on using that to sleep. So I think it can be very beneficial for athletes when they're on the road. So again, like not using it all the time, but they take it on the road, and it can help them to calm down, especially if they're traveling from like west to east, that type of thing, where their bodies are again trying to regulate to the new schedule. It can be beneficial, but again, I would always caution with supplementation, especially at a young age. Look at what they're doing for their nutrition, look at their lifestyle, and try to work some of those factors. I usually don't touch supplementation until athletes are about 16 years old, and it really is highly individualized. So again, making sure that we're looking at what specifically that athlete would need, and making sure that they're doing everything from a lifestyle nutrition perspective.
Awesome. Another question here. How long does it take for someone with a poor circadian rhythm to reverse the effects?
Yeah, another great question. It really is highly individualized, but from what I've seen, like that player that I just mentioned for the case study, that was about 5 weeks ago, and about 3 weeks in, he was really starting to notice a difference. He was really making the efforts, and again, like his schedule is really nuts right now, so he was doing the best that he could. So it really depends on the person, but I do find that if it is a deep hormonal issue, it can take sometimes people up to 3 months, sometimes longer than that. It really depends on how kind of dysregulated that circadian rhythm is. But if you try to again do the things that we chatted about today, typically you'll start to see some changes, maybe even if it's just like falling asleep better, or like staying asleep a little longer. So those types of things you will start to notice more.
Awesome. And we have a question here around, are there certain devices that are either more or less blue light oriented, or are all electronic devices giving off blue light?
Yeah, so the worst ones are our computer screens and our phones. They are giving off, and our iPads. So anything that's again, like that LED screen, like it is causing more issues in terms of giving off blue light. So again, like, and it's what we want to be on the most in the evening, but unfortunately, yeah, the screens and the phones have apps, and they have and even my computer, I have an app called Flux, which actually at 8 p.m. or I think it's 8 p.m. every night, it actually goes to like an amber type screen. And so it will actually, if you're traveling to different time zones, it will actually adjust to that as well, in terms of like decreasing with the sunlight as well. So that's an option, again, if you have to look at your screen, but the phone and the computer screen have been shown to give off more of this blue light, and we're also closer to them.
Awesome. We got a question here about napping. So is napping during the day a good thing or a bad thing? And can a nap during the day lower the quality of sleep one gets at night?
Yes, also highly individualized, and it depends, which is my favorite answer, which, again, is hard because it really depends on the individual. But napping, actually, I do encourage for example, for my pro hockey players, a lot of them really love to take afternoon naps. There's a cutoff point with how much, because it will affect their sleep. So anything that's longer than an hour and a half, it can sometimes affect their sleep. So if it's 3-hour nap in the afternoon, that'll be very difficult, because that's a small sleep as opposed to nap. A nap can be 20 minutes to an hour and a half. An hour and a half is sometimes a bit longer, but I do think that they can be very beneficial for, again, an individual. You shouldn't be using them to make up for poor sleep, relying on them all the time for making up for poor sleep. You should really work on the sleep at nighttime and then use them to get that extra recovery in the afternoon. So yeah, go for it. I think it's an individual thing. The biggest thing you want to check there is, if you wake up groggy from a nap, and you have to pound coffee right away, typically not a good thing. It's probably too long.
Awesome. We got a couple more here for you. What about sugars? Sugars before bed, how do they affect sleep?
Oh yes, my favorite topic. I always make fun of cereal. It's my favorite thing to kind of pick on, because I used to eat cereal as an athlete, and for some reason athletes just love eating cereal before bed, and it definitely did not help my recovery or my sleep. And so the issue with that is that, again, if you're having too much sugar before sleep, you're not using that sugar. So when we have a simple sugar, for example, even though cereals have some fiber, a lot of them are pure sugar. And so essentially you're increasing your blood sugar right before bed. And then you can have that dysregulation throughout the nighttime. So you can actually wake up often. You can feel hungry because you're actually not satiated from eating protein and fat. So if you're going to have something before bed, I typically recommend, again, a tart cherry ice cream with some protein, or something, or a shake or something along those lines. Because if you're just having sugar before bed, your blood sugar will be I'm not using this energy right now. I'm going to bed and I need to actually relax, and it's going to have this up and down throughout the evening, and that will probably wake them up throughout the night.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely. I usually eat some cereal before bed, so I guess I gotta stop doing that.
I'm sorry, Eric. I used to too. That's why I pick on it.
So got a question here about, I guess, timing, and when would you consider passing off an athlete to go get a sleep study or sleep test? Is there time periods of when some of the steps they've been following you suggested no longer work? Is there a time period then they should go and seek additional attention?
For sure. I mean, again, if they're doing everything possible in terms of the lifestyle stuff that we talked about, their diets on, and yeah, it's just a chronic insomnia issue. I typically would, especially if they're in season, you don't want it to go longer than a couple months. That's even a long time. I try to get athletes to, obviously talk to their team doctors, and if they don't have a team doctor, just really making sure that they're talking to their general physician about those issues. The issue is that obviously we don't want to just rely on medications. We want to see if we can do all of this, but I would, if it is a chronic issue and it's lasting months and months, absolutely go get their hormones checked out, their sleep cycles, and see if there's something that, will help them to get into restful sleep.
Awesome. I got one last one here for you, unless anyone else wants to chime in the chat. Will increasing natural light and outdoor time help in offsetting the effects of blue light?
Yeah, great question. I think the research is starting to come out on this, but we do know that natural light is king in terms of queen, in terms of really making sure that we're focusing on our natural bodily rhythms. So again, there's, we know that we get vitamin D from the sunlight. We know that, we feel better when we're in sunny places. These are things that, again, have been studied, but looking at a screen all day and then trying to go outside, like it is difficult and can sometimes like really depend on the person. So I think it's just having boundaries, especially once the sun goes down. I think that's when we're most effective. So as long as you are in the sunlight a bit and are not relying too much on, screen time, I think that you're doing the best that you can. I know that's not a very specific answer and I'll have to look into it further with the research, but I think we're getting there and looking into a lot of these things.
Awesome. We have one last question that actually just came in, if we'll get to it. But what is the effect of the quality of sleep in terms of either the mattress or the sheets? You mentioned temperature. How does that affect the quality of the sleep that an athlete may be getting?
Yeah, absolutely. I worked with Under Armour for a while, and they have like these recovery sheets. Like Tom Brady, I think was the head athlete with them, and I don't know if they make a difference, but I feel like once I started to use these sheets and to like make my little sleep haven, they did make a difference. My sleep has improved. I don't think that the science they have looked into a lot of this stuff because they're looking at obviously performance of athletes, and recovery is a huge pillar for that. But I think one of the big things with sleep is like making sure that you're changing your sheets every 3 days. This was a big one for me. I read a study on that. And so it's just like, again, like making sure that you're having clean sheets, especially your pillowcases, and making sure that you're like resetting again, your bedroom to be, clean and again, like a sleep haven as opposed to like a stress bomb. That's a big one. I think, just again, making sure that, sleep's like pillow. Again, I would definitely invest in a good pillow. I like a minimum pillow because I'm not a huge fan of having my neck cranked too much. So again, it's just individual preference, but mattresses and even cooling mattresses, like there's a lot of companies coming out with like, cooling mattresses, weighted blankets, these types of things. Again, all strategy and all individual in terms of what you prefer. But I would, create a sleep haven as much as possible. Another little trick is if you love plants, I am like a crazy plant lady. And I have a snake plant in my room, and it actually helps with the air quality. So if you can do small things like that, they can make a big difference in making like your optimal sleep haven.
Tremendous, Sylvie. That everything you have shared today, I can read in the chat, and you can take a look at it later. Everyone is making positive changes in their life as soon as it starts.
Oh, perfect.
I've had a couple people saying about the coffee comment. You said no coffee in the morning. Go out for a walk
just
first.
Give it an hour. Just give it an hour. It was a huge change for me too. I always don't I make these changes too to see if they make a difference, and that one definitely does.
Awesome. Well, I do want to thank you very much, Sylvie. Thank you for your patience at the beginning there, and thank you everyone for your patience for tuning in today. We hope it has been a tremendously insightful session. The next session of OCC21 takes place today at 3 p.m., where we'll be looking at planning a safe return to training and competition following a lockdown. As well, if you have missed a past session, you can view a past recording within each individual session. A play button will appear if the video is available. You will have access to this hub for 30 days from the end of the conference. CAO will make available public video links for you to watch outside of this hub at the conclusion of the conference via email. Thank you again, everyone. Thank you again, Sylvie. And for everyone, have a pleasant afternoon, and we will see you at the next session.
Thank you.
And we're off.